Watched him from the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off I-40. Sitting in my car with a lukewarm coffee and a smile I hadn't planned on having, he was standing in the driveway of what used to be our house, 4,200 square feet of colonial revival on Maple Creek Road. The house I'd designed the kitchen of myself, the house I'd paid the mortgage on for 19 years. And he was just standing there, looking at the foundation, looking at the grass that had already been seeded where the basement used to be. His new wife had her hands over her mouth. My son was on his phone, probably Googling whether this was legal. My daughter-in-law had started crying. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still a little warm. Let me back up. My name is Sylvia Crane. I'm 63 years old. I taught high school English for 11 years, then spent the next 22 building a property management company that now handles over 400 residential units across 3 counties in Tennessee. I did not inherit money. I did not marry into money. I built it by waking up at 5 in the morning, taking calls from tenants at 11 at night, and reinvesting every dollar I made back into something that would grow. My husband, Richard, worked in pharmaceutical sales. Good money, not great money. Enough to feel important at dinner parties. We were married for 31 years. I found out about the affair on a Tuesday in November, which felt appropriately grim. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious in the way you see in movies, where the wife starts finding receipts and lipstick on collars. I found out because Richard left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he went to take a shower, and a message notification popped up from a woman named Daphne with a heart emoji next to her name, and something in my gut just knew. The way your body knows before your brain catches up. I didn't open the messages. I didn't need to. I took a photo of the screen with my phone, closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it, and went upstairs to fold laundry like nothing had happened. That was 2 years and 4 months before I watched him stand in that driveway. I want you to understand something. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I don't throw things. I don't make scenes. What I am is patient, and what I am is thorough, and what I am is someone who spent 22 years reading every contract line by line before I signed it. So when I found out my husband of 31 years had been seeing a woman 12 years younger than him, a dental hygienist from Cookeville named Daphne, who, I would later learn, believed Richard owned my company, I did not confront him. I called my attorney. Her name is Wanda Okafor, and she is the sharpest woman I have ever met in my life. I told her what I knew. I told her what I suspected. And then I told her I wasn't ready to file. Not yet, but I wanted to know exactly where I stood. That first meeting took 3 hours. I left with a yellow legal pad full of notes and a plan. Here is the thing about owning a business that your spouse has never truly been involved in. If you've structured it correctly, it is yours. Richard was listed as a beneficiary on my life insurance. He was listed as an emergency contact at my dentist's office. He had never once attended a board meeting, signed a vendor contract, or reviewed a quarterly statement from Crane Property Management. His name was not on the LLC. His name was not on any of the company accounts. He had, over 31 years, cashed every check from our joint account and assumed the company was ours, the way people assume the sun is theirs, without ever doing a single thing to keep it rising. What he did have his name on was the house. We'd bought it together in 2004, both names on the deed. That was the one thing I'd agreed to without thinking much about it. Because in 2004, I was still thinking like a wife and not yet like a business owner. So for 2 years and 4 months, I thought about the house. I kept living my life. I kept cooking dinner. I kept going to church with Richard on Sundays. I kept going to my son Kevin's basketball games. He coaches youth league now. Late 30s, 2 kids, lives 20 minutes away. I kept having my daughter Pam over for Sunday dinners. I kept being, to all appearances, the same Sylvia I had always been. What I also did, quietly, over those 2 years, I restructured. I spoke to Wanda every month. I documented every joint expense Richard charged to our shared accounts that had anything to do with Daphne. Dinners, hotel stays in Nashville, a weekend trip to Gatlinburg he told me was a sales conference. I documented Everything. I built a very thick folder, and I started the process of buying Richard out of the house. This is the part people don't know about. When one spouse wants to remove the other from a marital home's deed, there is a legal process for doing so that doesn't require a divorce. It requires the other spouse's cooperation, which Richard, believing our marriage was entirely fine and that I had no idea what he was doing, was very willing to provide, especially when I told him I needed to refinance the house in my name only for business reasons. I had our accountant write a letter. I had Wanda draft the paperwork. Richard signed it at the kitchen table in April of last year, while I made him a pot of coffee and asked him how his day had been. He said it had been good. I imagine Daphne thought so too. 2 months after that, Richard came home on a Friday evening and told me he wanted a divorce. He was very calm about it. He said he had grown in a different direction. He said he hoped we could be respectful and adult about this. He did not mention Daphne by name. He did not have to. I told him I appreciated his honesty. I asked him where he planned to stay. He said he'd figured he would stay in the house while we worked things out. I said, "Okay, I'll give you 2 weeks." He looked surprised. I think he expected more resistance. Here's what Richard did not know. The house was already in my name only, had been for 2 months. He had no legal claim to it. He had signed away his share of that deed while drinking my coffee and asking me about my day. And he had done so freely and without an attorney present because he trusted me completely and because he is, as my grandson would say, not the sharpest tool in the shed. What he also did not know, I'd already been talking to a contractor. I want to be very clear here. The house was mine. Every penny of the down payment had come from my business. Every mortgage payment had come from the same account Richard had never once deposited a paycheck into directly. The home was an asset, and I had a legal right to do with it as I chose. What I chose was this. I was not going to sell it. I was not going to rent it out. I was not going to let Richard come back to it, or let it become a symbol of the life I was done living. What I was going to do was tear it down, not out of spite. Let me be precise about that. Out of clarity. That house had never been a happy house. It had been a functional house, a beautiful house, a house where I'd raised 2 children and hosted Thanksgiving for 30 years. But I had designed a kitchen for a man who turned out to be a liar, and I had built closets for his shirts and a garage for his car and a mudroom for his golf clubs, and none of those things were mine. The house was mine legally, but it had never really been mine in any way that mattered, so I decided to unmake it. To start from nothing on a lot I already owned and build something that was entirely in every board and beam and cabinet pull, Sylvia Crane's. I gave Richard his 2 weeks. He moved some clothes into an extended stay hotel in Murfreesboro and began what I assume was his very romantic next chapter. I spent those 2 weeks working with the contractor, finalizing the permits and arranging the demolition for the Tuesday after Richard's family took a trip to a resort in Hilton Head. A trip Kevin had organized specifically so the whole family could celebrate Dad's new beginning, which I had known about because Kevin, love him, has never learned to keep his voice down on the phone. They left on a Saturday. The crew showed up on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, 4,200 square feet of colonial revival on Maple Creek Road was a clean, flat lot with fresh topsoil. I watched from the road. I didn't need to stay. The contractor sent me photos. They came back on a Friday. I parked at the Cracker Barrel because the sight lines are good, and because I wanted a coffee, and because if anyone saw my car, well, I was just a 63-year-old woman getting a coffee. Nothing strange about that. Kevin called me at 4:17 p.m. I didn't answer. He called again at 4,019. I let it ring. Then his wife called and I let that ring too. And I sat there in my car and watched from a comfortable distance as my ex-husband walked the perimeter of the empty lot like a man trying to remember if he had parked his car somewhere and simply forgotten where. Daphne, and I cannot stress enough how much I'd been looking forward to seeing Daphne, was standing by the rental car in a sundress, looking like she had expected to inherit a house and was now doing the math in real time. The math, sweetheart, does not add up. Richard called me at 4:32. I answered that one. "Sylvia," he said. There was a quality to his voice I had never heard in 31 years of marriage, something very close to fear. What happened to the house? I had it demolished, I said. Silence. It was my house, Richard. You signed off your share in April. I have the paperwork if you need a copy. More silence. We need to talk about this, he said. We really don't, I said, but you might want to talk to your attorney about the hotel bill. I stopped paying the joint Amex last week. I finished my coffee and drove home to my sister Faye's place in Brentwood, where I'd been staying very comfortably for 6 weeks. Thank you very much. Now, here is where I would love to tell you that was the end of it. But if you've ever been through a divorce after 30+ years, you know that nothing is ever quite that clean. The divorce itself was not complicated because we had an attorney who was very good and documentation that was very thorough and a husband whose own attorney took one look at the financial disclosure statements and quietly advised him to settle. What became complicated was Kevin. Kevin, my son, 38 years old, youth basketball coach, father of my 2 grandchildren, Mackenzie and Brody, who I adore completely and separately from anything their father does. Kevin, who I had loved since the moment he was born and who had apparently, somewhere in his late 30s, decided that his father's happiness was more important than his mother's dignity. Kevin called me 3 days after the demolition and told me I had gone too far. I asked him to define too far. He said I had destroyed the family home. He said it was a place of memories. He said it was a place of memories. He said his father was devastated. I asked him if his father's decision to spend 2 years with another woman while I cooked his dinners and did his laundry had also been too far, or if that category only applied to me. Kevin said this wasn't about taking sides. Kevin, I said, you went to Hilton Head to celebrate your father's new life while he was still legally married to your mother. That is, in fact, taking a side. He didn't have a good answer for that. What he had instead was a speech about how I was making things harder than they needed to be, which I had heard variations of my entire adult life from people who found my directness inconvenient. I told him I loved him. I told him I would always love him. I told him that my door was open whenever he was ready to have a different kind of conversation, and then I said goodbye and went back to what I'd been doing, which was reviewing the architectural drawings for the new house. My daughter Pam, who is 40 and teaches 2nd grade in Franklin and has, in my opinion, considerably more sense than her brother, called me the same evening. Mom, she said, are you okay? I'm wonderful, I said. And I meant it. Did you really tear down the house? I did. Pause. Then, good. Pam had known about Daphne for nearly a year before I said anything. She'd seen them together at a restaurant in Nashville and hadn't told me because she hadn't known how. When she finally told me, a few months before the divorce, she cried in a way that told me she'd been carrying it a long time. I told her it was okay, that I already knew, that it was going to be fine. She asked me how I was so calm about it. I said, because I've had time to make a plan. Now, the divorce was mostly handled by the time the demolition happened. The paperwork was filed, the financial disclosures had been exchanged, and Richard's attorney had been very quiet since seeing the business documentation that confirmed Crane Property Management had never, in any legal sense, been Richard's. What Richard had hoped to walk away with was half the marital assets, meaning half the house, half our joint accounts, and he had apparently told Daphne with some confidence a significant portion of the company. The company conversation was very short. His attorney raised it. Wanda looked across the table with an expression I can only describe as pleasantly lethal and said, "We'd be happy to discuss the company. Shall we start with the wire transfers, mister? Crane made from the joint business account to a personal account in 2021 and 2022? Richard's attorney asked for a recess. When they came back, they were considerably less interested in the company. Here's what Richard walked away with: his personal retirement account, his car, his clothes, and a settlement that reflected his actual contribution to our marital finances, which, when you subtracted the money he had spent on Daphne over 2 years, including 2 weekend trips, Approximately 40 restaurant meals and a piece of jewelry I found on the credit card statement that I had absolutely not received came out to less than either of us had expected. He did not get the company. He did not get the lot on Maple Creek Road. He got a check and a lesson, and I genuinely hope it was educational. Kevin came around in stages. First there was anger, then there was distance, then there was a phone call about 6 months later where he said stiffly that he understood he had not handled things well. I told him I appreciated him saying so. I did not tell him how much it had hurt, watching him drive to Hilton Head to celebrate the man who had lied to his mother for 2 years. I decided that was a conversation for another time, when the wound was a little older. Mackenzie and Brody still come over every other Saturday. We bake, we watch movies, we do whatever they want. Whatever happens between adults has nothing to do with them. Daphne, from what Pam tells me, has discovered that Richard's income is considerably more modest without access to my business accounts. Apparently, the pharmaceutical sales life is not quite the foundation she'd imagined when she was being wined and dined on someone else's credit card. I feel very little about this. Not satisfaction, not sympathy, just the mild acknowledgement of a predictable outcome. The new house went up in 13 months. It is not 4,200 square feet. It is 2,800, which is exactly the right size for one person who entertains occasionally and wants a real library. The kitchen is entirely mine. No compromises. No, Richard doesn't like that cabinet color. No, can we do something more traditional? The library has floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls and a window seat that looks out over the backyard, and a gas fireplace I can light without asking anyone's opinion. The guest room has a door that locks because I value my peace. The garage is sized for 1 car and 1 car only. I moved in on a Saturday in March. Faye came over with a bottle of champagne and we sat in the library and I cried, which surprised me. Not sad crying, the other kind, the kind that comes when something has been tightly wound for a very long time and finally gets to release. "You doing okay?" Faye asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm doing exactly okay." She asked me if I regretted any of it. The demolition, the way things ended, the years before that when I'd known and said nothing. I thought about it for a real moment, not a rhetorical moment. I thought about the Tuesday in November with the laptop on the counter. I thought about the 2 years of Sunday dinners and church and folded laundry. I thought about Richard signing that quitclaim deed at the kitchen table while I made him coffee. I thought about Daphne in her sundress standing next to a rental car in front of a flat lot. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is the kitchen I designed. That was a beautiful kitchen." Faye laughed and refilled my glass. "Here's what I know now that I did not know at 60 years old, or 50, or 40. Your life does not owe anyone an audience. You are not required to perform the role of wife or mother or gracious loser for the comfort of people who were not particularly worried about your comfort when they were making their decisions. You are allowed to be quiet and thorough and patient and strategic, and when you are finally done, you are allowed to tear the whole thing down and build something better." I go to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings now. I take a ceramics class on Thursday evenings. I drive with the windows down. I have dinner with Pam twice a month, and she makes me laugh harder than anyone I know. I talk to Faye every day. I read things I want to read and watch what I want to watch, and go to sleep when I'm tired without explaining myself to anyone. Last month, Kevin called to ask if he could bring the kids over on a Saturday that wasn't my usual weekend. He sounded a little nervous, asking like he wasn't sure of his welcome. "Of course," I said. "Come whenever you want. The door's always open." "Mom," he said, after a pause, "the new house looks really good." "Thank you, honey," I said. "I know. And the best part, the absolute best part, is that I am 63 years old and the company turned a record quarter and the library smells like new books and old wood, and I am in every way that matters just getting started." I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in my marriage, not the dramatic parts, not the demolition or the courtroom or Daphne standing in that sundress in front of an empty lot, but the quieter question underneath all of it. How does a person give 31 years of their life to someone and not notice somewhere along the way, that they've made themselves invisible. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is this, I noticed. I just kept choosing the comfortable version of things over the honest one. And for a long time, I told myself that was wisdom, that keeping the peace was a form of intelligence, that not making a scene was the same as being strong. It isn't. I know that now. What Richard did was a choice, and he made it every day for 2 years while I cooked dinner and sat next to him in church and acted like a woman who had no idea. But what it did in the years before that, shrinking, accommodating, letting someone else's comfort take up all the air in the room, that was also a choice. Every time I didn't ask a question I wanted to ask, every time I rearranged my opinion to match his, every time I let him take credit at a dinner party for something my company had built, that was me choosing smallness. And I did it so quietly for so long that I almost forgot it was a choice at all. The 2 years I spent preparing, talking to Wanda, documenting, restructuring, getting his name off that deed, were really about revenge. I know people want it to be a revenge story, and I understand that because the image of a man standing in front of a flat lot where his assumed house used to be is genuinely satisfying. But what those 2 years were actually about was me slowly, carefully, making myself the main character of my own life again, recovering the habit of thinking clearly, of acting instead of reacting, of trusting my own judgment the way I'd always trusted it in business, but had somehow abandoned the moment I walked through my front door. Richard didn't take 31 years from me. I gave them, and that's a harder thing to sit with. What I want people to understand, especially women my age, especially women who spent decades being the one who holds everything together while someone else gets to be the interesting one, is that intelligence is not just about being smart. It's about being honest about what's actually happening, even when the honest version is painful. It's about knowing the difference between patience and paralysis. It's about understanding that a plan made quietly, without anger, without drama, from a place of absolute clarity, is worth more than any reaction made in the heat of a bad moment. Kevin coming around didn't happen because I forgave loudly or fought hard or sent a message. It happened because I stayed steady. I left the door open without standing at it. That's all I did. The new house is better than the old one, not just because I chose every finish and every fixture, but because I built it knowing exactly who I was building it for. That's the thing nobody tells you about starting over at 63. It's not a consolation prize. It's just a beginning that knows itself better. I am still here. I am still building. And I have not finished yet.